Hey everybody, welcome to the Daily Friend. Today is the Wednesday edition of it. I'm so glad to be back. I did miss you guys. Remember, if you want to see any of the stuff that we produce here, or read rather any of the stuff we produce here, you'll find us on the Daily Friend website, dailyfriend.co.za. And remember guys, before we even start, the show's on YouTube, both on the IRR's YouTube page and my YouTube page. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment to the show, and hit that bell notification so that you're notified anytime and every time we post. I'm not alone as usual. Guys, good morning. Terence, who is one of our who's one of our researchers and analysts here at the IRR. How are you doing?
Well, thanks to yourself.
Marius, project manager and very accomplished writer and researcher also. Good morning.
Hello, Sichle.
Sounds very nice this morning, extra nice. And Sarah Gon, good morning. How are you doing? Sarah, of course, is our chief editor of the Daily Friend. Guys, let's kick it straight away. Sports quotas. It's cricket season. We're all super excited for hopefully they won't choke Proteas. But there is this big issue that always sort of tails our sports teams in this country around quotas. How do we pick our team, and how do you pick the best, for our teams? Morris?
Well, because I'm a pedant and a bad person, I've pointed out it's not cricket season, but cricket season in England. And we're playing the Cricket World Cup in England, which starts tomorrow. So, but just, as we say, the first game tomorrow is between us and England. Mm-hmm. And one of the most interesting things that came out of this World Cup was the announcement by Tabang Moroe, who is the CEO of Cricket South Africa. And he said for this World Cup, teams would not be selected with any political considerations in mind, which basically meant there wouldn't be any quotas or any targets or anything in the teams being selected. And there's 2 points to make here. The current team, it's probably one of our most diverse teams picked ever. In the starting lineup, there's starting 11. There's probably going to be 3 black guys tomorrow. There's going to be Kagiso Rabada, Lungi Ngidi, Andile Peklukayo. All those guys on merit. No, there's no question marks over their ability, and we don't even need we don't need quotas at this kind of level.
And this is the game against England. Sorry, It's one of the warm-up games.
No. Tomorrow's the opening game of the World Cup proper.
Sorry. There we go. I just revealed the extent of my cricket knowledge insofar as what's happening right now.
We've got a report that's going to come out next week, most probably. And we asked people various things around race relations, and so on. One thing we've found was that 83% of respondents to our survey said sports teams should be selected on merit and with no regard given to quotas and so on. So while I think there is probably an argument to be made for quotas at lower levels, like under 19 sides, to give people who possibly excluded in the past opportunities, I do think at professional level and certainly at Proteas level, there shouldn't be any quotas. As again, you can possibly in the 90s, there might have been, you could have made the argument for quotas and so on, but now in South Africa in 2019, you don't need quotas in the national side. And as I say, all the guys who are going to be playing tomorrow have been picked on merit, and it's probably going to be one of our most diverse sides that have been picked.
But it does speak to, guys, I'll just open this question to everybody. It does speak to the fact that it's where we focus our attention, if you will, on developing, the quality sports player. We've had this weird fixation on picking and choosing, the racial winners and losers, but really very little, or rather not enough work done on developing the grassroots to allow that ambitious young, if you will, black individual who wants to play sport at a professional level to have an opportunity to get there on, their merit, on their own work. Terence, are we doing enough to actually support the poor black chap on a sand dune somewhere in Cape Town who watches this TV, looks at the SA cricket, SA rugby, SA soccer, and goes, I want a shot at being like those people?
Well, I like to quote my sister-in-law who's from Taiwan.
Yeah.
She remarked, she can't understand the paucity of sports facilities in poor communities for a country that is as sports mad as South Africa.
Yeah.
The other thing I think about the whole debate around quotas in South Africa is that we tend to be very parochial. This is not simply something that impacts South African sports people. Can you imagine how insulting it is to a foreign sports team to think that they're not playing the best we have to offer?
Absolutely.
What does that say about the effort that we as a country are putting into our sporting prowess? Now, I remember back about 10 or 15 years ago, and I think it was President Mbeki who once remarked, a few lost sports games is a fair price to pay for transformation. I think that within that comment was buried so many unspoken assumptions. First of all, that it was not the quality of the game that mattered. That it wasn't about it wasn't about doing your best. That this was about that this was inevitably, at least the way that thinking had framed it, about degrading quality. And the problem is, I don't think that you're going to find any sporting audience in the world that's going to say, well, we were absolutely thrashed, but at least our team was diverse.
Absolutely.
I think that's a point to make. If South Africa wins by some miracle this World Cup on the 14th of July, I mean, I don't think anybody except maybe Dan Hurt and Andile will be saying, oh no, this team was too white or too black. I don't think any South African, if we win that World Cup, will care about the melanin in the various players' skin.
You just want to know that you fielded the best, and they represented you as the best of the best. Guys, just a reminder, let's move closer to our mics. Sarah, I'm going to segue into another question of, I suppose, a form of integrity. We just discussed the integrity of our sports codes. But the ANC's Integrity Committee seemingly found nothing wrong with David Mabuza. David Mabuza is now sworn in as an MP and is on the pathway, I suppose, to becoming the deputy president once again. Is there something wrong with this picture?
Yes, the Integrity Committee apparently hasn't decided anything. It couldn't have possibly decided anything meaningful. It had 22 people to consider. Apparently, David Mabuza also stormed into their meeting on Friday and said, listen to me, because I'm whatever. And also, they don't make decisions. They can only make recommendations to the NEC, the ANC NEC, and it's the NEC that makes decisions. And you're not going to have an environment in the notwithstanding only 2 days, you're not going to have an environment where people who know anything outside of the ANC are going to come in and give evidence. It's not safe for a start.
Does this maybe speak to, guys, I want to open this up to everybody, does this speak to maybe a culture in the ANC we've seen over the past 25 years where we develop these institutions, you will, whether the intra-party or constitutional ones, Chapter 9 organizations, where they're great in terms of, what they should be doing insofar as checks and balances to power, but they have no teeth. I mean, it's a sort of common refrain we hear about the AG, for example, that, he does this wonderful work of, checks and balances, making sure all the, the dots are I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, but there's no teeth to actually enforce a decision when something's patently wrong also. Let me look to Terence on this one. Like, is the Integrity Committee something we can, and I say we as South Africans, not necessarily as, are they a body that anybody can trust within the ANC to actually do the right thing?
Well, I think that there's a bigger issue there. I would be very skeptical of trusting the internal processes of most political parties.
Yeah, you and I both.
Because ultimately the fundamental incentive of any political party is to retain power. Absolutely. And the key strategic issue for the ANC is to maintain its unity in order to maintain that power. What I think, though, what it alludes to is something altogether more serious. You get the government you demand, you get the government that you deserve, or the government that you will accept.
Yeah.
For those of us who are mortified by the prospect of a Mabuza deputy presidency or perhaps a future Mabuza presidency, I think there's a strong element of looking in the mirror about this. When you cast your vote, this was this was not concealed. This was put before man and God, the ANC is doing no more than sending to Parliament those people that it offered as representatives to the people of South Africa.
But we had to. Sorry, I just want to point out that some people like Peter Bruce said we had to give Cyril a big mandate.
Oh Lord. I want to segue back to Sarah because David Mabuza, let's zoom in on him for a couple of minutes. This is a man with a checkered history. To
say the least.
Someone who, insofar as what's being alleged, is not the friendliest of chaps in terms of how his colleagues back in Mpumalanga view him. Sarah, what do we know?
What do we know? His history is so checkered, it would make your eyes crossed. He comes from Mpumalanga. He ran in Mpumalanga. He was first under the ANC, for the ANC, the MEC of Education. Yeah. And he was a teacher. So you think he had sympathy. And Mpumalanga schools are probably the worst in the country. Yeah. A lot of the pit latrine deaths we've been exposed to come from that province. Money put towards improving schools has barely been spent on the schools. It is an absolute disaster. And apparently, he committed to building schools, but largely big schools, because big schools allowed you to siphon off larger amounts of money. The smaller schools, not so much. And so, for example, a school that the New York Times quoted as would cost $11 million became $30 million. And so just to give you a pound, he then inflated 1 year, I think it was about 97 or 98, the pass rate, the matric pass rate in Mpumalanga. It went from very poor to 73%. When in fact it was under 50%. It was at that point that the ANC moved him to MEC of Housing, which is, more of the same, but affecting probably less people, less small children. The thing is that he was once started to be investigated for having 14 million rand in cash in his house. Sorry, 4 million rand. Sorry, 4 million rand in cash. The police said it was 1,200. He said no, it was 1.4 million. So. But that investigation went absolutely nowhere. And at least 3 people there have been in 2 decades, about 20 political killings in Mpumalanga, largely of ANC people, and 3 in particular that related to knowing that they were going to blow the whistle on issues like the corruption around the Mbombela Stadium and those sorts of issues. And in the case of that, the chap whose name just escapes me, who was murdered, his wife and children were subsequently kidnapped and tortured into giving a confession. This is the man who could be our president. I mean, everything about him is beyond appalling, and he apparently is known or was known as Joseph Stalin. That was his nickname. Wow. And although he was recruited into the war by I think it was Matthews Pauser, he wasn't really heard of again. And when Pauser returned to the country in the 90s. He was told not to touch him because they believed he was an apartheid spy in the Eugene de Kock style.
There's something, and I'll give everybody a chance to chip in here, but there's something very, what's really sad and maybe rather scary is that his is not an isolated story. I mean, I was in Durban just a bit ago after the election, and one of the chaps there, I forget his name, very senior official within the municipality, sort of with the sort of Zandile Kumete crowd, bragged to me, we're at one of the sort of fancy clubs, was bragging to me about how, this election was in the bank, we had bootloads of money to dole out to activists and blah, blah, blah. And there was no sense of, hey man, what I was doing was wrong. It's just almost an accepted culture that, this is how we work. If you don't do it, someone else will do it. An almost criminal underlayer, that underbelly, if you will, that's accepted in the ANC. And no one, if you segue back to the whole, where we began this conversation about an integrity committee, there's no real concerted effort there to assert some form of integrity in the party.
But can I just mention that that is exactly the method he used to grow his ANC branches in the province, which is one of the smallest and probably the poorest, to about 190%. So in other words, he created the numbers to get him up into the higher echelons of governance, and I mean, there is nothing right in any of this.
Guys,
I think part of the problem is for most people in the ANC is still more important than South Africa.
Yeah.
So ANC unity is far more important than doing the right thing for the country. And I mean, whatever David Mabuza has done, he needs to be investigated and either cleared or sent to jail, one of the two. Yeah. But the ANC's obviously, they're going to be just sweep this all under the carpet, and it's not impossible we'll have Mabuza presidency within a decade, if not earlier.
Well, I think what Mario says about the primacy of the ANC. I mean, it's not just within the ANC. There's a large part of the commentariat. I seem to remember, I think it was Richard Kelland who's often made the argument that South Africa's future depends on a strong ANC because only the ANC can channel people's demands. But I think that argument has sort of
run its course.
Well, yeah, you're dealing with a party now that that is so fractionalized that it's one of the reasons for its existence is merely to try and pursue that elusive unity.
Yeah.
Once that is achieved, we can sort of advance to the sunlit uplands of the National Democratic Revolution. But we never seem to be able to get out of that slough of trying to find some sort of workable internal coherence. Let me also say, though, that I think the way that South Africa's democracy was launched, the ANC was far from alone in making these dirty moral compromises. You're from KZN, and so am I. Well, the other big party there, the IFP, certainly had people who, as one activist from that party once put it to me, defended their turf, sometimes very aggressively. The National Party's list had some very, very strange characters on it, and the Democratic Alliance has not always been too discerning about who it's willing to sign onto its own lists. Certain people of royal blood with also checkered pasts.
Also a lot of old Nats also.
Well, and I mean, we could, once again, yes, I think this is an ANC problem, but I think it is a problem broader than the ANC.
Absolutely.
And it gets into something very dark inside our political culture. We have a double standard to maintain.
I don't think that a lot of that is unusual in world terms.
Yeah.
It's that the ANC, particularly having been in power for 25 years, have taken it to a level, a depth of almost depravity that is extraordinary. I think there is a sort of line that you cross, and they're so way past the line, no one remembers where it is.
I think there's a certain manner in which it's been formalized in the ANC. A cadre deployment was counter-constitutional from day one.
Absolutely.
Yet, not only did the ANC trumpet it, but many sympathetic journalists and analysts, were pointing out how this was just so great because it was going to enable the political and the bureaucratic systems to function in tandem. Did nothing of the sort. It led to collapse almost immediately.
And there's always a fig leaf that's offered in defense of these bad sort of policy decisions. So for instance, you'd often hear transformation being trumpeted as a good reason to have your own people deployed into positions. It's absolutely nonsense. It's power. It's a power grab essentially.
Of course.
Guys, as we look to wrap up the conversation, there has been a very interesting past week or so, if you will, of people who've been very successful at certain stuff, right? I mean, there's one lady who climbed Everest, and upon returning, we were told ad nauseum by the media, oh, it's because she's a wonderful person, she's black, that's how she did this, she's the first black this, first black that. The pilot who flew during the inauguration, again, we're told about their skin color, their hue, as being somehow very important, and that's the signifier of this event. There's something morally corrupt about that, isn't there? Like, this individual works hard, puts in the hard yards, pursues opportunity, and at the end, when it's time for the accolades, their skin color becomes the primary thing, apparently, that was their motivation for success. Am I being maybe... I don't know. Am I being counter-revolutionary by opposing being viewed as a skin color?
Some people would say you are, but I think given the fact that I think there's so few heroes in this country at the moment that, and particularly given the level of corruption and the Zondo Commission, what's coming out of it, that if someone of color is seen to achieve, it is a thing. Perhaps the best thing that's come out of the fact that they are black and they are women and they've achieved is not the fact they're black and they're women, but they have achieved. They had to work damn hard. The climber had to try 4 attempts before she could get up, and that is not unusual. Last year she had to be lifted off the mountain because she broke something. To get down this year was a feat in itself because 11 people have died on that mountain this year. So that is achieved. And also, you cannot possibly go onto that mountain without an extraordinary amount of sort of guts, training. Everything has to be in place.
Your black skin won't help you.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying, though?
Yeah. But what it does show, ironically, is that the altitude, whether you get altitude sickness or not, is a genetic thing. And you have to have the gene. And some do and some don't. And that has nothing to do with the color of your skin. The pilot came from, let's call it a classically disadvantaged background. Yeah. But she's now a combat fighter pilot. She would have had to done well at school, which she did. She would have had to work very hard to once she was admitted to train. And you can be absolutely sure that she is competent to fly that airplane in every sense of the word, because you cannot have a fighter pilot who isn't. The consequences are too
In other
horrible
words,
to give.
she put in the hard work, not her
Absolutely.
blackness, not her
Absolutely.
womanness, or any
That's
of
how
this
things are
other
done. That's how things are
identitarian
achieved.
sort of thing we hear. Guys?
Yeah, let me just add to that.
Yeah.
I think that's something that's maybe lost when we celebrate this achievement. And to qualify as a fighter pilot for anyone is an achievement.
Absolutely.
If we are going to have armed forces, and not all countries do, I think it's a reasonable decision to say that South Africa doesn't do that. Costa Rica doesn't have an army, and there've been calls to abolish it in South Africa. If we are going to have some sort of combat power, we need people who are competent to participate in that. And that means high physical standards, high mental standards. We also need to make sure that they are properly equipped and that they're able to do their jobs. I think there is no greater betrayal a state can do to its citizens than to send people into a combat situation where they're not properly equipped to do their job. And I think this is one of the great scandals of the arms deal, that this was not about putting the correct equipment into our soldiers' hands, but putting money into bank balances.
That's right.
But I think that is already. I've read somewhere that our peacekeeping force in the Congo can't operate effectively because half the Roy folks that we have up there there's no money for fuel or something. I can't remember the exact thing, but our forces can't deploy properly.
Maybe as we conclude, because this is a bit of a passionate one for me, and if you guys have been paying attention to the Big Liberty Show, we've launched a new show called Blacks Only, where we cover some of these topics from the perspective of freedom lens, a liberty lens, an individualist lens, if you will. There is something just incredibly demeaning when you achieve something, you've put in the hard yards, and you feel that sense of emotional pride at having made it, your family's around you, and then some individual with their own tainted worldview comes and says, oh, how do you feel being the first black to do this? Or what does this do to blackness for you to achieve this? There's something just demeaning about that. Like, so what? You don't see my success unless I was black, or you only see the success, because I'm black. Would we not have just an absolute meltdown of social media if, for example, some individual who's white said, hey, thanks to my white power, I made it. I did this today.
Hashtag white excellence.
Is there a double standard we're seeing when it comes to those sort of is there a double standard that we're seeing when we sort of have one grouping celebrated because of their quote-unquote blackness and achievement, but another which just achieves, or any other person who just achieves, is celebrated as the individual who put in the hard work yards and achieved that? Or on the flip side, sorry to be long in this, is berated because they achieved, because they're white. Is there something just wrong with these sort of ideas?
Well, I don't know. In South Africa, it's all very complex because of our history.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, the first person to go to university in a family is a great thing.
Absolutely.
So I get where people do come from, that kind of thing, but also excellence is excellence. But sometimes somebody should be celebrated for being the first black person to do it. I mean, and I get where that thought process comes from, but it's also something that we shouldn't be put front and center. This person, they made it because they're black. No, they made it because they worked really hard and they happen to be black.
I think it's the work very hard that's the issue.
Absolutely.
Because there is a tendency when looking at the issue of white privilege to hear people comment that the privilege, which is ill-defined, if defined at all, is what led that person or most people to be fairly comfortable if they are white. The point is that there may have been certainly advantages being white under apartheid, but that is not what made someone successful or not successful. What made a person successful was taking a situation and working at it and working very hard at it and having knocks along the way. And that's how life works.
Absolutely.
Look,
Terence?
I think that one of the classic statements on this was by Frederick Douglass. He made a speech once whose title was "What to Do with a Negro." Now, excuse me if the word offends anyone, but we are talking the 1800s.
Yes.
And he said, "I say, do nothing with him. Your doing with him has already played great mischief amongst his people." He said, "I do not ask that you nail the apple to the tree. If it is to fall, let it fall. But when you see a black man trying to educate himself, do not interfere." And I think that this is germane to South Africa, because I think that we accept so much mediocrity. Mm-hmm. This is across across society. that when we see some sort of excellence, it's in such short supply that we want to try and grab it for our own for our own particular cause. And this isn't entirely entirely racial. I've seen religious groups doing this. I remember the Catholic Church, talking about how they, we're going to introduce Blaine Zamandi as a Catholic politician. I think which comes as a surprise to Blaine Zamandi. But
Communist Catholic.
Contradiction. What I'm getting at is that I think that we need, as a society, to focus on lifting that tide of excellence, so that we're seeing excellence as something to aspire to, but which increasingly is the norm. And then I think many of those, I personally think it's fairly harmless if one wants to identify, with a skin color or whatever, and say, well, this is one of my people or whatever, as long as it's not hostile to anyone else. But we certainly need a lot more of those Everest climbers and fighter pilots and Frederick Douglasses.
Hopefully World Cup winners, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need them whatever color they
Yeah,
are.
absolutely. Guys, thank you very much. But I do agree on that last point. Give people the freedom to access opportunities, work hard, and pursue excellence. And then you'll find that their race is actually quite irrelevant. You build a culture that's deeper, that speaks to, being a South African, if you will. That's the kind of society I want. But anyway, guys, thank you so much. Remember, guys, you can find the writing, analysis, and news pieces by any of our colleagues over here on the Daily Friend website. That's right, dailyfriend.co.za. And as always, support our work. Help us do what we do. And you can do that by becoming a friend of the IRR. You do that by SMSing your name to 32823. Terms and conditions do apply. An SMS will cost you R1, but pledge your 90 Rand a month. It's people like you that help us get into the battle of ideas and get you also involved in a lot of our campaigns and stuff. There's a lot of perks and benefits to being a friend of the IR. But hey, as I always say, if you don't like SMSs, you can also find us online at www.irr.org.za/join. And you can sign up for a monthly debit order there. Guys, remember to catch the show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And on Friday, we put out our podcast. That's right, the Daily Friend Show podcast. It is on Iono. I'll share those details with you online. Guys, thank you so much. I'll see you on Friday.